Yeah, I didn't do very good.
All right. We are ready to begin, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to pick up in Deuteronomy chapter 29. And if you'll recall, 28 deals with the blessings and the curses.
Mhm.
So it is specifically a discussion of if you are obedient, then here's what will happen to bless you. If you're not obedient, here's what will happen. Now, the reason that this comes after that is the idea that God is trying to get them to hear is the covenant is serious, so let's renew it. Okay, so they've waited 40 years. That's an entirely new generation of people, and so now we are going to discuss once again what you are agreeing to do. Okay, and as we
nobody can say I didn't know.
Exactly.
No.
Okay, that is a pretty common excuse that okay.
That I still use it today sometimes.
So chapter 29 begins with, these are the words of the covenant that the Lord commanded Moses to make with the people of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant that he had made with them at Horeb. So the original covenant is at Mount Sinai.
With this Horeb?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now they are coming back to discuss once again the covenant.
Wait, is Mount Horeb also the Mount of Olives?
No.
That's somewhere
That's
else.
A different place.
Okay.
The Mount of Olives is on the eastern side of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula. Okay. So Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt. Okay. To Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land. The great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and those great wonders. Okay. So remember that when we talk about covenant, certainly covenant between God and people, always begins with what God has done for them. Okay. So remember, Exodus 20, what does it start? I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So the beginning of the covenant starts with, here's what God has done for you. Okay. So now Moses is saying, you have seen all that the Lord did to Egypt to bring you out. Okay. So, but he goes on, he says, but to this day, the Lord has not given you a heart to understand or eyes to see or ears to hear. So you saw all of that, but in a way, you have been blinded a bit that you don't completely understand what God has done. Okay. So I have led you, and this is Moses talking. Okay. I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. So let's talk about what's happened.
Just in the last 40 years.
Okay. Your clothes have not worn out. Your sandals have not worn off your feet. Okay. Now it says you've not eaten bread. Now what it's talking about is you've not eaten bread like normal because it's from manna. The bread has been from manna.
Yeah, and there's no leaven in it, right?
Right, there's no leaven. Now it doesn't necessarily, we don't know if it was they didn't do that at all, or what he's saying is you didn't have to harvest grain to make bread.
Gotcha.
Okay, but it does say you've not drunk wine or strong drink. So there's been no fermented
juice of any kind. Well, they were on the moon, didn't
right.
raise any crops.
So that's really part of that. Okay. So that you may know that I'm the Lord your God, I've provided for you. Okay. And when you came to this place, so near where they are now, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us to battle, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it for an inheritance to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manassites. Therefore, Keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all you do. Okay. Now, he's speaking two sides. Okay. Part of this is keep all the covenant that I've already told you, but also keep what I'm about to tell you. Okay. But notice, this covenant is based on all of the work that God has done for them. And that's what he's going to get on with. He says, you are standing today, all of you, before the Lord your God, the heads of your tribes, your elders, and your officers, all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and the sojourners in your camp, from the one who chops your wood to the one who draws your water. Okay, so watch. You are standing here today. The reason that you are in this place right now is so that you may enter into the sworn covenant of the Lord your God, which the Lord your God is making with you today. Okay, so you have come to this point at this moment, at this time, so that you can renew and restate and build upon the covenant that you have made with the Lord your God. Now, for the last 40 years, you have been somewhat obedient.
At least more obedient than your predecessors.
Okay, but now we are going to move forward. Okay, so that you may enter into the sworn covenant of the Lord your God, with the Lord, which the Lord your God is making with you today, that he may establish you today as his people. Okay, and that he may be your God, as he promised you, and as he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Now, this is an important element. Why does there need to be a re-giving of the covenant and a renewal of the covenant?
They didn't have it. They didn't remember it.
Okay.
For them to go through it. They didn't have it.
That's part of that.
Because they're the younger generation,
Okay.
so the original covenant was made with like their parents and stuff like that.
That's part of it too.
Rededicate, right?
But there's another issue that's going on here. They're about to move to a new place.
Oh, okay.
They've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years.
Yeah.
Their wandering is about to end, and they are about to enter into the land that God has promised. And so, because they are about to move into this place where God has promised, remember that some of the things he just mentioned will no longer be true. Okay. Number one, the discussion of their clothes not wearing out, their sandals never wearing out.
Oh,
the discussion of manna.
Yeah.
The discussion of nothing fermented. The discussion of not harvesting grain. All of those things that God has said has been true of the last 40 years will no longer be true.
I got a question though.
Yes.
Like, well, didn't Aaron's sons get drunk and make strange
So we
fire?
don't know exactly what they did. The Bible doesn't say exactly what they did.
They just said
right.
that they
now,
made strange fire.
Now, like I said, it is not clear as to exactly what he's saying, whether they haven't ever done that, or whether he's saying, as you come before the Lord today, you guys are all sober, you're all okay.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But the idea here is that they have fasted, they have not partaken of wine today. That may be what he's saying here.
Okay, gotcha.
But the idea, part of the discussion is still the fact that here in a matter of weeks, they are going to enter into the land of Canaan. When they enter into the land of Canaan, the first thing they are going to do is they are going to eat for the first time of the fruit of the land. And from the moment they do that, the manna stops.
Okay.
So before they've really taken any ground,
once they're eating from the fruit of the ground,
once they are eating from the produce of the land, the manna stops.
Okay. And I'm sure the clothes start wearing out too.
Right. Okay. So we are now moving into a new phase of the children of Israel. And so there is a renewal of the covenant. Okay. And by the way, you will see this again because and we won't go into it now because we're not going to go to the next book, but Joshua at the end of his life does this again. Not quite to the extent, but he comes to the people as they have now had rest from the conquering of the land for a period of time and says, okay, now you guys have to choose whether you're going to continue to live up to the covenant of God or whether you're going to go your own way. So at each major step in the history of Israel, there is a renewal of their covenant relationship with God. So now they're about to go into the land that God has promised. At the end of Joshua, they have now defeated the enemies that God has set, and he's given them rest for a period of time. Okay. Then in 1 Samuel, we see a renewal of the covenant after the first king. So even as they are, and by the way, even as they are coronating their first king who is not going to be holy, Samuel goes, you have a choice now. You've chosen a king and you've made God frustrated because you chose a king. But if you'll follow God, I'm renewing the covenant with you now. If you will follow this, it will go well for you. So he renews the covenant once again. And this is true over and over and over and over again until Jesus.
Okay.
See, but with Jesus, we move into a new covenant. So the covenant relationship between God and his people is renewed multiple times. Now, the problem is that they never obeyed it. Okay. By the way, another example. What is the story whenever we were going through Ezra, Nehemiah, and all of that? What happened at the end of the book whenever they built the walls and all of that? They had a meeting, and guess what Nehemiah and Ezra did? They read them once again the book of the law and renewed the covenant with them, because the people who had been exiled because of sin have now come back. Okay, let's start the covenant again. Let's remind you of how to live the covenant.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a pretty normal thing. Okay. But God goes on. He says, it is not with you, or it is not with you alone I am making this sworn covenant, but with whoever is standing here with us today before the Lord our God, and with whoever is not here with us today. So this is for everyone who is choosing to follow God, whether they are in the crowd or not.
That's kind of cool, though.
Okay, so he goes on. You know how we lived in the land of Egypt. So you know of our slavery in Egypt. You kept wanting to go back to it, but you know. And how we came through the midst of the nations through which you passed. So you know what our life was like before we left Egypt, and you know what our life was like whenever we were in the wilderness. You have seen their detestable things. Okay, so you have seen the sin of the nations.
What verse are we on?
This is verse 17. Okay, their idols of wood and stone, of silver and gold, which were among them. So, in Egypt, as you were slaves in Egypt, you saw all of Egypt's idols, and you saw the detestable practices they did to those idols. As you were wandering through the wilderness, you saw the detestable idols of the Canaanites and the detestable practices that they did to them. Beware lest there be among you a man or woman or clan or tribe whose heart is turning away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations. So what is he saying? Look around and make sure there's nobody amongst our group that is starting to think, oh, I think I'll go serve them.
Yeah.
Okay. Beware, okay, lest there be among you a root bearing poisonous and bitter fruit. So, by the way, all the way back here in Deuteronomy, Moses is using a phrase. He doesn't say it exactly as Jesus, but he is saying the same thing that Jesus says several times. You know the state of a tree by the fruit it gives. So watch. If you are following God, you are bearing fruit. If you are not following God, you are also bearing fruit. The thing that tells the difference is what kind of fruit you're bearing. Okay, so he says, be careful that there's not someone in here in amongst you who is bearing fruit that is going to poison you against the Lord. Okay, it's your job to watch. Now, in the New Testament, there is a story about a farmer, a landowner, and it says that in the midst of the growing season, he had an enemy come and plant weeds among his crop, tares.
Okay.
Okay. They would look enough like wheat that it would not be easy to tell the difference. Although if you knew what you were looking for, you could tell the difference. And his servants go, do you want us to go rip up all the tares? And he goes, no, not yet. Because the roots have intermingled.
Oh.
So as you go to pull up the tares,
You can pull up your wheat.
You're going to destroy the wheat. Okay. So notice, and this is part of this discussion, what Moses is telling them is you need to watch so that you can make sure you can tell the difference. Okay. Now, in the story in the New Testament, what eventually happens is God says, when it comes time for the harvest, when the growing season is over, and it's now time to harvest all the crops, then he sends them out and says, now you go separate them. And the tares take them and burn them.
Keep all the good
and
stuff.
Keep all the wheat. Now, what is Jesus getting at? He's getting at, in many ways, this same discussion. For those that have rejected Jesus, have rejected the covenant with the Lord, and are seeking other gods or seeking other ways of life, all of that, they are like weeds in the garden. And eventually they will be separated out and burned. Whereas those who have followed Christ or followed God here, they will be blessed. But be careful, because guess what? If you're not paying attention, you'll fall for the wrong fruit.
You know what that tells me? And so today, foreign people coming in, taking over our country.
There's some of that, but it's more along the lines of those within our country, whether they're foreign or domestic, whether they were born here or not, who have chosen to not follow God and his ways. Okay. Because there are also those who come in from other countries who do follow God, and they are and maybe the best explanation of that, and let's be fair in the way we say this. What delayed, and boy, this is scary truth. What delayed the Methodist Church for 2 years from going in with their whole gay movement and all of that has blown up the Methodist Church? But what peoples?
Non-Christian.
Nope. Were followers of Jesus within the Methodist Church from Africa and from China. They were third world, second and third world Christians who have suffered for the faith and who have remained loyal to what the Bible says.
Yeah.
That stopped it the first time it went through. Now, the second time it went through, they just ignored those people and went on. We're going to do it anyway. But understand, it wasn't American Christians who stopped the downfall of the Methodist Church for 2 years.
They were probably
It was followers in China and Africa and all of that. The sad truth of the matter is we have come to a point in our culture where now other countries are sending missionaries to us because we have, being part of the people, and I'm going to say it this way, being part of even within the church discussion. The scary part is this not only affects nation, country, all of that, it affects the church. There are people within the church who are bearing poisonous fruit. One who, and so he explains who they are in verse 19. One who, when he hears the words of this sworn covenant, blesses himself in his heart, saying, I will be safe, though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart. So let's dig into what he's just said. God won't punish me. I'm not going to follow God, but he won't punish.
Not that big.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And lying to everybody else. Okay. Now watch. This will lead to the sweeping away of moist and dry alike. So eventually, and let's be fair, this is something we have seen in our culture. It is not only those within the church who are falling away from faith, who are being torn up in the midst of our culture. It's both those that have chosen to follow God and those who haven't. Now, those who have chosen to follow God, can they be caught up in? Yes. Okay. And I'll use this explanation. That church that's a block and a half that way, I wouldn't have said, I'm not saying I don't know all of their, but from a doctrinal standpoint, it wasn't like they were in the midst of all the wickedness that was going on above them, and yet that church is gone. They were swept away with the rest. Now, for the believer, God has protection for them in the long run, but that doesn't mean they won't suffer for those that have chosen to reject what God is saying. Mm-hmm. And so Moses is telling them, you need to keep an eye out so that you can take care of those who are these people so that you don't get swept away with them. See, so verse 20, and by the way, let's make sure we understand in the midst of the discussion of a loving God, let's make sure we hear this discussion. The Lord will not be willing to forgive him, but rather the anger of the Lord and his jealousy will smoke against that man, the man who says, I'll be fine even though I'm not going to follow God. And the curses written in this book will settle upon him, and the Lord will blot out his name from under heaven. So please understand, if you live in open rebellion to God, there is punishment to come. That is a critical element in this. Is God loving? Yes, but he is also just and fair, and he will not put up with rebellion.
And that type of person will take others down with.
Mhm. Yep. Now it says, and the Lord will single him out from all the tribes of Israel for calamity. So let's use an example. At the beginning of Joshua, the guy named Achan. He chose to live in rebellion to the commandment of God. And what happened to him? Died. But not just him. His entire family were swept up in his sin. So, in accordance with all the curses of the covenant written in the book of law, and the next generation. So now he's still talking about this guy. The next generation, your children who rise up after you, and the foreigner who comes from a far land will say. So this is the brutal picture here. If you choose to not follow God, then my anger will burn. And when my anger burns, then here's what's going to happen. That next generation who comes up after you and the foreigner who comes in from far away will go, wow, that's bad. When they see with all the when they see with all the curses, okay, when they see the afflictions of that land and the sicknesses with which the Lord has made it sick, the whole land burned out with brimstone and salt, nothing sown and nothing growing, where no plant can sprout. An overthrow like that of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and wrath. All the nations will say, why has the Lord done thus to this land? So if you continue to choose not to obey, there will come a point where I will do something to this land of yours that the people who come in go, ugh. Why has the Lord done thus to this land? What caused the heat of this great anger? Then people will say, it's because they abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt, and went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they had not known and whom he had not allotted to them. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against this land, bringing upon it all the curses written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them from their land in anger and fury and great wrath, and cast them into another land, as they are this day. Now let's go back to that parable. Why was God patient? Why was the farmer patient to wait to tear everything up? So he didn't destroy those that were his. However, eventually his anger comes to the point where he just uproots all of them. Now, notice, and by the way, let's use that parable to discuss how all of that works. So we have the northern kingdom destroyed in 722 BC. Okay. The northern kingdom, while there were some that were faithful, the majority of the leadership and all of that were wicked from the time they began. Okay. Now, we need to make sure we understand something, though, within this. The destruction of the northern kingdom takes place during the reign of Hezekiah in the south. And just before the destruction of the northern kingdom, Hezekiah begins a movement to restore faith, to restore the covenant in Judah. And as he decides they're going to do the Passover for the first time in a while, he invites anyone who wants to come from the northern kingdom to come down and enjoy the Passover with them. So there is a strong possibility that those that were faithful in the northern kingdom, many of them moved to the southern kingdom prior to the destruction. So God provided a way for them. Okay. The southern kingdom falls in 586 BC, but in the years preceding, there are two major events that occur. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar comes and he sacks Jerusalem, and he doesn't destroy it, but he comes and marches against Jerusalem, and he takes a large group of the most wealthy, most intelligent, took the cream of the crop back to Babylon. Okay. Amongst that group are four young men that we know fairly well.
Yes.
Okay. Azariah, Mishael, Hananiah, and Daniel. Or as we know them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay. Now, then about 15 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes again because the Jews decided to have a little revolt. And he comes again, and once again, he deports a bunch of people. The second time through, he deports Ezekiel and kind of the middle class group. Okay. Then in 586, the Jews rebel again. And this time he comes and he destroys Jerusalem. Okay. By this time, there's only really the dregs living in Israel at this point. Okay. Now, let's deal with this parable for a minute. What does it say? It says he's unwilling to just go in and uproot the tares because of what it's going to do to the wheat. Mm-hmm. So what he eventually does is when it comes time to harvest the wheat, he harvests the wheat and puts it away, and then cuts out and burns out the tares. In the process of harvesting, he separates them. Okay. That's what he did with Babylon. He sends Nebuchadnezzar the first time to pull out a remnant. Now, hear me when I say not all of them were faithful to God, but amongst them were a group that was incredibly faithful to God, that God had chosen to be the remnant of his people. Okay, including the king of Israel and most of his court. Okay, now the king was not faithful, and so he was punished. They cut his eyes out. And he spends 25, 30 years in prison. And the last words of, I think it's King, says that as the Jews are done, then this particular king of Judah is released from prison, and for the rest of his days he lived in the court of the king of Babylon. Well, what happens with the remnant? The remnant find their faith in God, they find their covenant with God, and they rebuild the covenant relationship between themselves and God. They become faithful once again with men like Daniel, with men like Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, with men like Ezekiel, with men like Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest, and all of these men through that 70 years of exile. And then God brings them back and reinstates the covenant with them. Okay. Now, the same discussion goes here. During the period of time that the Jews were in exile, people from other nations would come and look at Israel and go, wow, what happened?
God was angry.
Mm-hmm. And then suddenly God says, now it's time for me to show my mercy to you. Okay. Now, the same thing happens again. In 70 AD, so about 37 years, about give or take, about 37 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, Rome comes in and wipes Israel off the map, scatters the people. It's called the diaspora, the scattering. Okay. And then we've talked some about this, but that there is and whether you hold all the prophetic stuff, but this is important to get into. In 1849, an American journalist went and toured Israel. Or no, 1867. Sorry, 1867. Toured Israel. And he wrote that it was a dead and desolate land that looked like it had been abandoned by God. Okay. Now, notice, and the foreigner among you will come and say, and the foreigner who comes from a far land will say, when they see the affliction of that land and the sicknesses with which the Lord has made it sick, burned out with brimstone and salt, nothing sown and nothing growing, where no plant can sprout, and overthrow like Sodom and Gomorrah. And the nations will say, why has the Lord done this? Okay. That's exactly right. And the American author closes his book by saying it looks like a place that's been cursed by God. But that becomes the catalyst, and it is after that point that the movement to bring the Jews back into the land begins.
How does all this relate to what's happening now?
Well, we don't know for sure. What we do know is, and let me say it this way, here's what I can tell you with some certainty. Why they're at war right now, why the war is going right now, I can't sit there and say, okay, God is doing this or God is doing that. What I can tell you is that, number one, Israel, while it is populated by Jewish people, many of them are not religiously Jewish. Okay, they're agnostic, they don't believe in God at all. Okay. However, you are still talking about a conflict that is well over 3,500 years in the making.
The Hatfields and the McCoys,
Okay.
only much bigger and much
So-
longer.
And two brothers or half brothers, Isaac, Ishmael.
Ishmael.
Okay. Now, what I will tell you are my opinion, and I'm going to say it that way because it's important to say it that way. My opinion is we are building to something. Okay. How exactly it's going to work, I don't know. But there will come a point where, and we have already seen some of the things, I've mentioned it to you before. In Ezekiel, there is a discussion of a kingdom coming and attacking Israel and God standing in defense of them. Okay. The names within the passage lead most scholars to believe we're talking about the place that is modern day Russia. Okay. Now, let's be completely fair. Russia as a nation has hated the Jews for ever. Okay.
Really?
Well, would you like to know who the second most genocidal man against the Jews was in human history?
Was it Hitler the first?
Yep.
Okay, no, yeah, who's the second?
Stalin.
Who's Stalin?
The president, the leader of Russia at the same time.
As at the same time as Hitler?
Absolutely the same time.
Oh, wow.
I saw
Who could compete? Who could
I
beat
saw
the
a
Allies?
comedy show that was joking about it a little bit. Not about the situation, but joking about the circumstance. Is that Hitler's born in Austria. And Stalin was born in Poland. Okay. And the joke they made was that, Stalin's parents goes, "Oh, you want to be the most evil man in history." Well, there's this guy who just got born in Austria, and he wants to be the most evil man in history. Okay. Stalin killed millions, just like Hitler did.
Wow.
Okay. Stalin was a wacko. But understand, and by the way, still going on today, there has been some 1900 years of hatred of the Jewish people.
That's such a long time to hold a grudge.
But would you like to know the reason?
Sure.
Well, when the Catholic Church took over the Roman Empire, well, the Jews killed Jesus. Now, in all fairness, it was the Romans who killed
It was
Jesus.
the Romans, but the Jews
Okay.
had him arrested.
But there has been a movement that the Jews were untrustworthy and sneaky and all that because they murdered Jesus. And so, and this is something we have to understand, when Hitler was decided to perpetuate genocide on the Jewish people, his biggest supporters were the Catholic Church in Germany. They thought it was a great idea.
Even more reason I don't like Catholic.
Okay. But it's not just because of Catholic, it's because and by the way, let's make sure we understand, because it is one of the things that caused America to be designed the way it was. But it is also one of the things that we are seeing in our own culture right now. Why was it such a big deal for the US to say we want, and let's use the term because it really is a discussion here. Why did they want religion and government separate?
So that they don't corrupt each other.
Okay. Because they had all come from nations where the church was the government.
Okay.
Okay. In England, the Church of England was the government.
I thought the Queen
In
was
Germany, well, but the church was mega powerful within politics.
Oh,
Okay. In Germany and in Italy and in most of Europe, the Catholic Church was in charge.
is that where the saying they keep the church and state separate?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So let's make sure we understand. And I know we've chased a rabbit into history, but it's
That's
important.
Cool. I don't mind.
So the discussion that we get into about this wall of separation between church and state is a concept that is in the founding documents, but it's exactly the opposite of what everybody today tries to say it is. The people who said we want separation between church and state said we want the church protected from the government, not the government protected from the church. So, and by the way, this is a state discussion too. Massachusetts had a state religion before they became the U.S. They were Puritan. If you wanted to live in Massachusetts, you had to be Puritan.
Wow. That's crazy.
Okay. So it was states like, and by the way, this is the important, Rhode Island was founded by Baptists. And they said, no, we don't want we want the freedom to share Christ with you, but we don't want to force you to become
Our religion.
Which is what our history has been up until the last 60, 70 years, is we wanted government to stay out of the church. By the way, that's what the Constitution actually says. Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or limiting its free exercise. Which means, by the way, just so we understand, that it means Congress can't say, okay, you Muslims, you can't meet.
That's why people were popping off with all these churches where there's sacraments like LSD or mushrooms. And nobody can
Because-
stop them because it's their religion.
Because by technicality, that is the way that works. Okay. But understand that what we're seeing here within our culture today is a movement away from God. Well, if God wouldn't put up with it from them, he's not going to put up with it from us.
Not at all.
And so it is important that we get this idea. Now, when we go forward, when we get to the next chapter, we're going to see if you repent, then I'll forgive. So notice, and this is an important element. We talk about God being forgiving and loving and all of that, and that is true. But repentance is a part of that. And if there's no repentance, right.
Goodness.
Okay. All right. We're going to stop right there. We'll pick up with 30 next time.
Okay.
Ready to go home.
I don't blame you.
Me too, and I still gotta
I'm
go
gonna
home.
go to bed this early.
What?
So why you gonna go to bed this early?
It's dark already.